Snow blankets the streets of a small Montana town as an 11-year-old boy sits alone with his last sandwich. He hasn't eaten properly in days, but when a lost, hungry, and exhausted German shepherd approaches him, he makes a decision that defies all logic. A few blocks away, a former Navy SEAL is desperately searching for the dog. Neither knows that an act of kindness is about to reveal a secret that will shake the entire region. Before we begin, please subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. A bitter Montana wind swept through Willow Creek as heavy snow clouds gathered above the distant mountains. Winter had settled over the valley weeks earlier, coating rooftops, sidewalks, and endless stretches of pine forest beneath a blanket of white. By late afternoon, most of the town's residents had already retreated indoors. Warm lights glowed behind frosted windows, while smoke curled from chimneys into the darkening sky. Only a handful of people remained outside, hurrying through the cold with their heads lowered against the wind. It was the kind of evening when loneliness seemed heavier than the snow itself. Ryan Carter knew that feeling well. At 35 years old, the former Navy SEAL had spent years learning how to survive difficult places. He was tall and heavily built, with broad shoulders, powerful arms, and the steady posture of a man who had carried responsibility for a long time. His dark brown military haircut remained unchanged from his service days, and a sparse beard outlined a strong jaw. His gray-blue eyes were calm and observant, but there was a sadness hidden deep within them that few people ever noticed. Combat had taught him discipline. Loss had taught him silence. After leaving the military, Ryan had chosen a quiet life outside Willow Creek, living in a small cabin near the forest where nobody asked questions about his past. The one constant presence in his life was Max. The 6-year-old German shepherd had accompanied Ryan through some of the hardest years after his service ended. Large and powerful, with a thick black and tan coat, intelligent amber eyes, and perfectly upright ears, Max possessed the confidence of a trained working dog. Yet beneath his strength was a remarkably gentle nature. Ryan often joked that Max understood people better than most humans did. That afternoon, the two had followed one of their usual trails through the snowy forest beyond town. The woods were quiet, except for the crunch of boots through snow and the occasional call of distant birds. Everything seemed ordinary until a young deer suddenly burst from a cluster of pine trees and sprinted downhill. For a brief moment, instinct took over. Max lunged after it. Ryan immediately called his name, but the dog had already disappeared between the trees. At first, he wasn't concerned. Max had wandered before and always returned. 20 minutes passed. Then, 30. Soon, nearly an hour had gone by, and the fading daylight began to turn Ryan's confidence into worry. Meanwhile, several miles away near the town bus station, 11-year-old Noah Bennett sat alone on a weathered wooden bench. The boy appeared younger than his actual age. His sandy brown hair was unkempt, hanging unevenly across his forehead. His face was pale from the cold, and the oversized winter coat wrapped around his thin body looked as though it had belonged to several other children before finally reaching him. The sleeves extended past his wrists, and his worn sneakers were poorly suited for Montana winters. Anyone looking closely would have noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. Noah carried himself like a child who had learned far too early that no one was coming to rescue him. Almost a year earlier, cancer had taken his mother. She had been kind, hard-working, and endlessly optimistic, even during the final months of her illness. Noah still remembered her smile, though some details had begun to fade. What never faded were her words. She had believed that kindness mattered more than money, more than success, and sometimes even more than fairness. After her death, Noah moved in with his grandmother. For a while, things seemed manageable. Then his grandmother suffered a severe fall and was transferred to a nursing facility outside town. Social workers promised help. Housing was supposedly being arranged. A foster placement was supposedly coming. Weeks became months. Nothing happened. Eventually, Noah stopped believing the promises. For the last several weeks, he had been surviving on his own. He collected cans, cleaned parking lots when business owners allowed it, and slept wherever he could find shelter from the cold. Some nights, he stayed in abandoned storage sheds. Other nights, he hid inside maintenance buildings near the rail yard. Every day felt like a battle against hunger, weather, and uncertainty. Today had been particularly difficult. He had earned almost nothing. Inside his pocket rested the final meal he possessed, a small turkey sandwich purchased from a discount shelf the previous day. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He had spent hours convincing himself to save it for later. Now, as darkness approached and the temperature continued to fall, he finally decided he could not wait any longer. His fingers trembled slightly as he removed the sandwich from its paper wrapper. Just before taking a bite, he heard a faint sound nearby. Noah lifted his head. Across the street, near the entrance of a narrow alley, stood a large German shepherd. The dog wasn't growling or barking. Instead, it stood motionless, with its head lowered. Snow clung to its fur, and its movements carried the unmistakable fatigue of an animal that had been wandering for hours. Even from a distance, Noah could see that the dog was exhausted. Their eyes met. The German shepherd cautiously approached. Noah stared at the sandwich in his hands. His stomach tightened painfully. Every instinct told him to eat. He had barely consumed anything during the previous 2 days. A sensible person would have protected the food. Most adults probably would have done exactly that. Then a memory surfaced. Not a memory of a place, not a memory of a face, a memory of a voice. His mother's voice. Kindness matters most when it's difficult. The words arrived so suddenly that they almost hurt. Noah lowered his eyes to the sandwich and slowly broke it in half. For several seconds, he hesitated. Hunger argued with compassion inside his chest. Finally, he made his choice. Love. He pushed the larger half toward the dog and kept the smaller piece for himself. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "You look like you need this more than I do." The German shepherd approached carefully, studying the boy with intelligent amber eyes. Then, with surprising gentleness, it accepted the food from Noah's hand. The dog ate slowly while Noah sat beside him in silence. Strangely, despite the hunger still gnawing at his stomach, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Neither of them noticed the pickup truck entering the parking lot nearby. Ryan Carter stepped out and immediately spotted Max. Relief flooded through him. A second later, confusion followed. His dog wasn't alone. Across the street sat a thin child, wearing worn clothes, and Max was eating food directly from the boy's hand. Ryan crossed the road quickly. As he approached, he understood exactly what had happened. The child wasn't feeding Max leftovers. He wasn't sharing extra food. He was giving away his own meal. Perhaps his only meal. Ryan's eyes drifted toward the remaining half sandwich resting on the bench. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had seen courage in war zones. He had witnessed people risk their lives for complete strangers. Yet something about this scene struck him differently. A hungry child had looked at an exhausted animal and decided that someone else's suffering mattered more than his own. Noah noticed him approaching and immediately stood. "Is this your dog, sir?" he asked politely. Ryan nodded. "It is." The boy glanced down at Max and offered a small smile. He seemed lost. Ryan looked at the child for several seconds. Then he noticed something that made his heart sink. The boy wasn't simply cold. He wasn't simply poor. He was completely alone. And for reasons Ryan couldn't yet explain, that realization felt far more important than finding Max. Ryan Carter stood beside his pickup truck while snow drifted across the empty bus station parking lot. The encounter had lasted only a few minutes, yet something about the boy refused to leave his mind. Noah Bennett stood with his shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, holding the remaining half of his sandwich as though he wasn't entirely sure whether he should eat it now or save it for later. Ryan had seen hunger before. He had seen it in war zones, refugee camps, and forgotten villages on the other side of the world. The expression was always the same. People learned to move more slowly. They learned to hide discomfort behind politeness. Most importantly, they learned how to make very little look like enough. Noah carried all those signs. Max had already made his opinion known. The German shepherd remained pressed against Noah's side, occasionally nudging the boy's hand with his nose. Ryan couldn't remember the last time Max had trusted a stranger so quickly. The dog possessed an uncanny instinct for character. More than once during Ryan's military years, Max had sensed danger before trained soldiers did. If Max liked someone, Ryan paid attention. After a few moments of conversation, Ryan finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Where are you headed tonight?" Noah hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a second, but it told Ryan more than any answer could have. The boy eventually shrugged and glanced toward the darkening street. "I'll figure something out." Ryan studied him carefully. There was no defiance in Noah's voice, no self-pity either, just resignation, the kind that shouldn't exist in someone so young. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the forecast promised one of the coldest nights of the season. Ryan knew exactly what that meant. People with homes would complain about high heating bills. People without homes would spend the night fighting to stay alive. "How about dinner?" Ryan asked. "Max already stole half your meal. Least I can do is replace it." Noah looked uncertain. His mother had always warned him about strangers. Yet the tall former soldier standing before him didn't feel dangerous. There was something calm about Ryan, something steady. The way he spoke reminded Noah of teachers from years ago, before life became complicated. More importantly, his stomach hurt from hunger. "Just dinner?" Noah asked. Ryan nodded. "Just dinner." A short time later, they entered Miller's Diner, a family-owned restaurant that had served Willow Creek for nearly 40 years. Warm light spilled across polished wooden floors, and the smell of beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee wrapped around visitors the moment they stepped through the door. For Noah, the scent alone felt almost overwhelming. Hunger sharpened every sensation. The owner, Martha Miller, immediately noticed them. At 68 years old, Martha was a short woman with silver hair gathered into a loose bun and warm brown eyes that seemed to understand people before they spoke. Years earlier, she had lost her husband to a heart attack, and grief had softened her rather than hardened her. Since then, she had developed a quiet habit of helping people whenever she could. She greeted Ryan with a smile before her attention shifted toward Noah. "Who's your young friend?" she asked. Ryan glanced toward the boy. "Someone who could use a good meal." "Someone. B." Martha needed no further explanation. Within minutes, steaming bowls of beef stew arrived alongside thick slices of homemade bread, roasted potatoes, and mugs of hot chocolate. Noah tried to behave politely. He truly did. But once he tasted the first spoonful of stew, hunger took control. Ryan pretended not to notice how quickly the food disappeared. The boy wasn't overeating. He was catching up. Throughout the meal, Ryan avoided asking difficult questions. Instead, he spoke about simple things. The snowfall, fishing season, a moose that had wandered through town the previous spring and somehow ended up inside the local hardware store. Slowly, Noah relaxed. The tension in his shoulders eased. Once or twice, Ryan even caught him smiling. What struck Ryan most wasn't what Noah said. It was what he didn't say. Whenever conversation drifted toward family, school, or home, the boy's answers became shorter, careful, guarded. Years of military experience had taught Ryan to recognize people protecting painful truths. When dinner ended, darkness had completely settled over Willow Creek. Outside the diner windows, snow swirled beneath streetlights, and the wind had grown noticeably stronger. Noah immediately pulled his oversized coat tighter around himself as they stepped outside. "You have somewhere warm tonight?" Ryan asked. Noah stared at the sidewalk. Eventually, he answered, "An old storage shed near the rail yard." The words landed heavily. Ryan imagined the structure immediately. Thin walls, broken insulation, drafts pushing through every crack. It wasn't a place for anyone to spend the night, much less an 11-year-old child. Before he could respond, Max moved closer to Noah and sat beside him. The boy scratched behind the dog's ears. Max closed his eyes contentedly. Ryan sighed. "I have a cabin about 15 minutes outside town," he said. "There's a guest room, clean sheets, hot water, a real bed." Noah froze. Ryan immediately continued, "You don't owe me anything. You don't have to stay. If you'd rather leave after this conversation, that's your choice." "Noah, but tonight's going to be dangerous." The boy looked toward the snow-covered road, then toward Max, then back at Ryan. Fear and hope battled visibly across his face. Hope won. Just one night? Noah asked quietly. Ryan nodded. Just one night. The drive through the forest felt almost unreal to Noah. He sat inside a heated truck while snow-covered pine trees drifted past outside the windows. Max occupied the back seat, occasionally resting his head on the boy's shoulder, as though ensuring he remained there. For the first time in weeks, Noah wasn't thinking about where he would sleep. He wasn't planning how to stay warm. He wasn't wondering where his next meal might come from. When the cabin finally appeared between the trees, it looked nothing like the mansions Noah sometimes imagined rich people lived in. The structure was modest, built from timber and stone, with warm light glowing through its windows and smoke rising from the chimney. Yet something about it felt safe. The house seemed less like a building and more like a refuge. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine wood and burning firewood. A stone fireplace crackled softly in the living room. Family photographs were absent, but signs of life remained everywhere. Books stacked neatly on shelves, a worn leather chair beside the fire, and dog toys scattered near the rug. Ryan led Noah down a hallway and opened a guest room door. The room itself was simple, but welcoming. A neatly made bed stood against one wall. Fresh towels rested beside a small bathroom. A reading lamp cast a warm golden glow across the room. For several seconds, Noah simply stared. Nobody had prepared this room for him. Nobody had expected him, yet somehow it felt as though the room had been waiting. "You can sleep as late as you want," Ryan said. "Bathroom's yours. If you need anything, just knock." Noah nodded. Words suddenly felt difficult. "Thank you," he finally whispered. Ryan gave a small nod before leaving the room. Less than half an hour later, he passed by again while checking the cabin before bed. The guest room door remained slightly open. Inside, Noah was already asleep. The boy hadn't even managed to pull the blanket fully over himself before exhaustion claimed him. One arm hung loosely across the mattress, and his breathing had settled into the deep, steady rhythm of someone whose body had finally stopped fighting. Ryan quietly stepped inside to switch off the bedside lamp. As he approached, his attention drifted toward the worn backpack resting beside the bed. One of the shoulder straps had been repaired multiple times and was beginning to tear again. The bag sat partially open, revealing a school notebook, a faded photograph, and several folded documents. Ryan had no intention of searching through the boy's belongings, but one sheet had slipped far enough out that its heading was visible from where he stood. The words immediately caught his attention: Child Placement Review. Beneath it were additional documents carrying county markings and official stamps. Ryan felt a slow unease settle into his chest. Earlier that evening, he had assumed Noah's situation was the result of simple bad luck. Now, he wasn't so sure. Children weren't supposed to disappear from the system. There were procedures, reviews, caseworkers. Someone should have been responsible for this boy long before he ended up sleeping in storage sheds. Carefully, Ryan pushed the visible paper back into the backpack, without disturbing anything else. Then he looked once more toward the sleeping child. Outside, snow continued falling against the cabin windows. Inside, Noah Bennett was warm, fed, and safe for the first time in weeks. Yet the documents beside that bed raised questions Ryan couldn't ignore. Before turning off the lamp and quietly leaving the room, he made a decision. Tomorrow morning, he was going to visit the county social services office, because something about Noah's story didn't add up. Morning arrived quietly over the Montana Valley. Fresh snow covered the forest surrounding Ryan Carter's cabin, turning the landscape into a sea of white beneath a pale winter sun. From the kitchen window, Ryan watched thin streams of smoke rise from distant chimneys while coffee brewed on the counter beside him. It should have been an ordinary morning. Instead, his attention kept returning to the backpack he had seen the night before and the sleeping boy down the hallway. When Noah finally emerged from the guest room, he looked almost like a different child. The dark circles beneath his eyes remained, but they were less severe than the day before. His sandy brown hair was still untidy, and his oversized clothes still hung loosely from his thin frame. Yet something had changed. For the first time since Ryan had met him, the boy looked rested. Max greeted him immediately, trotting across the room with a tennis ball in his mouth and a wagging tail. Noah laughed softly as the German Shepherd dropped the ball at his feet. The sound surprised Ryan. It was the first genuine laugh he had heard from the boy. Breakfast was simple eggs, toast, bacon, and hot chocolate. But Noah treated the meal as if it belonged in a five-star restaurant. Ryan avoided mentioning the documents he had seen in the backpack. Instead, he spoke casually about the day's weather and asked whether Noah enjoyed school. The question created a brief silence. Noah lowered his eyes toward his plate before answering. "I used to." Ryan nodded. "When was the last time you went?" The boy hesitated. "About 7 months ago." Ryan nearly stopped eating. 7 months. An 11-year-old child had somehow disappeared from school for 7 months, and nobody had fixed it. The more Ryan learned, the less sense the situation made. A short time later, after making sure Noah was comfortable at the cabin with Max, Ryan drove into Willow Creek. The county social services office occupied a small brick building near the courthouse square. The structure itself appeared ordinary enough, but Ryan had learned long ago that some of the most important failures in society happened inside perfectly ordinary buildings. The receptionist directed him toward a case manager named Linda Harris. Linda was a woman in her early 50s, with shoulder-length blonde hair streaked with gray and tired blue eyes that suggested years of carrying problems she couldn't always solve. She appeared competent and kind, but also exhausted in a way Ryan recognized immediately. Government employees on the front lines often spent years fighting battles that nobody else saw. Ryan introduced himself and explained Noah's situation. The moment he mentioned the boy's name, Linda's expression changed. Only slightly, but Ryan noticed. She turned toward her computer and began typing. A few seconds later, her frown deepened. "That's strange," she murmured. "What is?" Ryan asked. Linda leaned closer to the monitor. "According to the system, Noah Bennett's case is still active. It shouldn't be. There should have been a placement review months ago." Ryan remained silent. Linda continued scrolling through records. The deeper she looked, the more concerned she became. "There are missing updates," she said. "Several of them." What does that mean?" "It means somebody stopped processing this file." The answer hung heavily in the room. Ryan had expected bureaucracy. He had expected delays. He had not expected disappearance. For nearly an hour, Linda reviewed records while Ryan waited. Eventually, she printed several pages and placed them on her desk. What emerged was a troubling picture. After Noah's grandmother entered long-term care, the boy's case had been assigned to a regional review department. Multiple assessments were scheduled. Several placement opportunities had supposedly been evaluated. Yet none of the documentation explained what happened afterward. The process simply stopped, like a bridge ending in the middle of a river. "What about the assigned worker?" Ryan asked. Linda checked another file. Her expression tightened. "Transferred." "And the replacement?" "Left the department." Ryan frowned. "Convenient." Linda didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. As Ryan prepared to leave, Linda glanced toward the office hallway before lowering her voice. "There are other cases." Ryan stopped. "What kind of cases?" Linda hesitated. The hesitation told him she was deciding whether she trusted him. Finally, she spoke. "Children who disappear from the system. Not physically, on paper. Reviews don't happen. Placements never get completed. Files get delayed. Most eventually get resolved, but some," she paused, "some just sit there." Ryan stared at her. "How many?" Linda shook her head. "I don't know." The answer bothered him more than any specific number could have. Outside the building, Ryan sat in his truck for several minutes, reviewing everything he had learned. His military career had taught him to recognize patterns. One mistake was an accident. 2 mistakes might be incompetence. But when multiple failures repeated themselves in similar ways, something else was usually involved. By early afternoon, Ryan decided to look deeper. His search led him to a retired school counselor named Margaret Ellis. Margaret was 72 years old, thin and elegant despite her age, with silver hair worn in a neat braid and sharp green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had spent nearly 40 years working with vulnerable children in Willow Creek and knew more about local families than most officials. When Ryan mentioned Noah's name, Margaret recognized it immediately. "Sweet boy," she said quietly. "Always polite. Always trying to stay invisible." Ryan listened carefully. Margaret explained that several children had vanished from local school records over the previous 2 years. Not literally vanished. They were still alive, but somehow they slipped through cracks that should not have existed. "I reported concerns more than once," she admitted. "Nobody ever followed up." The statement sent a chill through Ryan. By evening, a pattern had begun emerging. Noah was not unique. He was one of several children who had somehow been lost inside a system designed to protect them. Back at the cabin, Noah spent the afternoon playing with Max in the snow. For the first time in months, he looked like a normal boy. He built a snow fort. He threw snowballs. He laughed when Max repeatedly knocked over sections of his construction by accident. Watching from the porch, Ryan felt a mixture of satisfaction and anger. No child should have lost months of his life waiting for adults to do their jobs. As darkness settled over the valley, Ryan returned to the stack of documents he had gathered throughout the day. Names, dates, reports, missing signatures, incomplete reviews. Then one document caught his attention, a budget authorization form. The amount listed was substantial, far larger than expected. Following the paperwork trail led to a county office he hadn't previously considered, and attached to several approvals was the same name, Victor Langley, the County Family Services Director. Ryan stared at the document. The signature appeared again, and again, and again. For the first time, Noah's situation stopped looking like negligence. It started looking like something far more deliberate. As snow drifted against the cabin windows and Max slept beside the fireplace, Ryan slowly closed the file and looked toward the hallway where Noah's guest room stood. The boy believed he had simply been forgotten. Ryan was no longer sure that was true. The discovery of Victor Langley's name should have brought clarity to Ryan Carter's investigation. Instead, it raised even more questions. During his years in the military, Ryan had learned that corruption rarely announced itself openly. People willing to exploit the vulnerable usually hid behind paperwork, procedures, and respectable titles. On paper, Victor Langley appeared to be exactly the kind of public servant any community would trust. As Director of County Family Services, he oversaw programs designed to protect children, support struggling families, and manage millions of dollars in public funding. His public image was spotless. His signature appeared on charity brochures, newspaper articles, and community awards. Yet the deeper Ryan looked, the more difficult it became to ignore the patterns surrounding his office. Over the next several days, Ryan continued gathering information. Whenever Noah attended online school sessions arranged through temporary educational resources, Ryan spent hours reviewing public records and financial reports. What he found disturbed him. Funds allocated for emergency child placements had repeatedly been redirected into consulting contracts, administrative reviews, and special projects that seemed to produce little measurable benefit. None of it was illegal at first glance. In fact, the paperwork appeared remarkably clean. That was what worried Ryan most. Sloppy corruption was easy to uncover. Organized corruption was something else entirely. At the cabin, Noah gradually began settling into a routine. The constant tension that had shadowed him since Ryan first met him started to fade. He helped split firewood, fed Max every morning, and spent hours throwing tennis balls across the snowy yard, while the German Shepherd bounded through drifts of snow with endless enthusiasm. Watching the two together often left Ryan with conflicting emotions. Part of him felt relieved to see Noah acting like a child again. Another part felt angry knowing how many months of childhood had already been stolen from him. One evening, after dinner, Noah sat near the fireplace, while Max rested at his feet. The flames cast warm light across the room, as snow tapped gently against the windows. Ryan noticed the boy staring into the fire with an expression that seemed older than 11 years. "What are you thinking about?" Ryan asked. Noah hesitated before answering. Sometimes I wonder if anybody was actually looking for me. The question struck harder than Ryan expected. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Eventually, he pulled a chair closer and sat across from the boy. I think some people failed you, Ryan said honestly. But that doesn't mean nobody cared. Noah looked down. Feels the same. Ryan understood that feeling better than he wished he did. Years earlier, after losing close friends overseas, he had spent months convincing himself that the world had simply moved on without them. Grief had taught him how easy it was to mistake silence for indifference. Looking at Noah now, Ryan saw a child carrying that same burden. Sometimes, good people don't know where to look, Ryan said quietly. That doesn't make what happened right, but it matters. Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached down and scratched behind Max's ears. The dog leaned against him without hesitation. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Noah smiled. The moment lasted only a few seconds. Then Max suddenly lifted his head. The German Shepherd's ears stood upright. His body became rigid. Ryan immediately noticed. Years of training had taught him to trust the dog's instincts. "What is it, buddy?" he asked. Max rose from the floor and moved toward the front window. A low growl emerged from his throat. Ryan stood. Outside, darkness covered the forest. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement. A figure near the edge of the tree line, gone almost immediately. Ryan stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he scanned the property. Whoever had been there had already disappeared into the forest. The fresh snowfall made tracking difficult, but he found enough evidence to confirm what Max had sensed. Footprints. Human footprints. Someone had been watching the cabin. The discovery unsettled him. Very few people even knew where he lived. The next morning brought another surprise. Linda Harris called. Her voice sounded nervous. "Ryan, somebody accessed several files after your visit." Ryan's expression hardened. "What kind of files?" "The same files we discussed." A silence followed. Neither needed to explain what that meant. Someone inside the system knew questions were being asked. By afternoon, Ryan contacted an old acquaintance from his military days. Daniel Mercer was a 48-year-old federal investigator with a strong build, dark hair touched by gray at the temples, and a reputation for relentless honesty. Years of pursuing financial crimes had left him skeptical of appearances and patient with evidence. Unlike many investigators, Daniel preferred facts over headlines. After listening to Ryan's concerns, Daniel agreed to review the material. 2 days later, he arrived at the cabin. The meeting lasted hours. Ryan presented financial records, placement reports, budget transfers, and every irregularity he had uncovered. Daniel examined everything carefully, making notes as he worked. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "This isn't enough for arrests," he said. Ryan nodded. He expected that answer, but it's enough to justify a formal inquiry. That changed everything. For the first time, the investigation was moving beyond suspicion. Meanwhile, Noah remained largely unaware of the growing danger surrounding the situation. He knew Ryan was looking into what had happened to him, but he didn't understand how large the problem might be. To him, the biggest concern remained whether he would eventually have to leave the cabin. One afternoon, while helping Ryan stack firewood, he finally asked the question, "Do you think they'll make me go somewhere else?" Ryan looked at the boy. "Noah, nobody's making decisions today." The answer wasn't a promise, but it was honest, and honesty mattered. That evening, Daniel received a phone call. After ending the conversation, his expression had changed. "What happened?" Ryan asked. Daniel placed his phone on the table. "Federal auditors have been reviewing county grant expenditures." Ryan waited. Daniel continued. "They've already found discrepancies." For several seconds, neither man spoke. The pieces were finally beginning to connect. Mismanaged files. Missing reviews. Questionable contracts. Disappearing funding. Children falling through the cracks. None of it appeared accidental anymore. The following morning, federal authorities formally opened an investigation. Ryan watched from the cabin porch as snow drifted across the valley. Behind him, Noah laughed while Max chased a tennis ball through the yard. The sight should have brought peace. Instead, Ryan felt something else, the calm that comes before a storm. Because people who built corrupt systems rarely surrendered quietly. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered mountains, powerful individuals were beginning to realize that someone had started pulling on the thread that could unravel everything. Before sunset, Daniel called once more. This time his voice carried an unmistakable urgency. "Ryan, federal agents are moving tomorrow morning." Ryan stared out across the frozen valley. "What kind of move?" Daniel paused. Then he delivered the words Ryan had been waiting to hear. "Search warrants." As darkness settled over the cabin and the fire crackled inside, Ryan looked toward the guest room where Noah was finishing homework at a small desk. The boy still believed his story began with a forgotten file and a missed placement review. By tomorrow morning, everyone would learn it had always been something much bigger. The morning of the federal operation arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. Snow still covered the valley, but the storm that had dominated the previous week had finally passed, leaving behind an eerie calm. Ryan Carter stood on the porch of his cabin with a mug of coffee warming his hands, while Max sat beside him, watching the tree line with quiet vigilance. Inside the house, Noah Bennett was finishing breakfast and preparing for another day of online lessons. To the 11-year-old boy, the morning seemed ordinary. To Ryan, it felt like the beginning of something that would change many lives. The call from Daniel Mercer came shortly after sunrise. The federal investigator sounded focused but cautiously optimistic. Search warrants had been approved overnight. Multiple agencies were participating. Financial records, internal communications, and administrative files would all be seized simultaneously before anyone had the opportunity to destroy evidence. Daniel had spent enough years investigating corruption to understand how quickly guilty people tried to erase their tracks once they sensed danger. That was why federal operations moved fast. Ryan did not accompany the agents. His role had never been to make arrests. His responsibility had been to uncover enough truth for the right people to act. Still, throughout the morning he found himself checking his phone repeatedly. Every few hours, Daniel provided updates. What initially appeared to be a narrow investigation into missing child placement reviews quickly expanded into something much larger. Auditors discovered millions of dollars that had been redirected through consulting agreements and administrative contracts connected to companies with suspicious ties to county officials. Several records that should have documented emergency housing for vulnerable children simply did not exist. By midday, Victor Langley's carefully constructed reputation was beginning to collapse. For years, Langley had presented himself as a respected public servant. At 58 years old, he possessed the polished appearance of a successful administrator. His silver hair was always neatly combed back, his expensive suits perfectly tailored, and his public speeches filled with promises about protecting families. Local newspapers frequently quoted him. Community leaders praised him. Yet beneath that image, investigators uncovered evidence suggesting that funds intended for children had repeatedly been diverted elsewhere. The system had not merely failed children like Noah. In many cases, it had profited from their neglect. News traveled quickly through Willow Creek. By evening, television crews had arrived outside county offices. Reporters filled local broadcasts with updates. Residents who had once trusted the system began asking difficult questions. Former employees stepped forward. Anonymous tips poured into investigators' offices. What started as a review of a handful of suspicious files evolved into a sweeping examination of years of misconduct. Throughout it all, Noah struggled to understand why everyone seemed so interested in records and paperwork. "They're talking about me on the news?" he asked one evening. Ryan shook his head. "They're talking about people who forgot their responsibilities." The boy considered that answer carefully. "My grandmother always said grown-ups were supposed to help kids." Ryan stared into the fireplace. So did mine. For a long moment, neither spoke. The simplicity of Noah's observation somehow carried more weight than all the financial reports Ryan had reviewed over the previous month. Within weeks, arrests followed. Several county employees faced charges related to fraud, obstruction, and misuse of public funds. Victor Langley resigned before formal charges were announced, but resignation could not shield him from the evidence investigators continued uncovering. Federal prosecutors eventually built a case demonstrating how resources intended for vulnerable children had been systematically diverted for years. The investigation also triggered reforms. Independent reviews reopened hundreds of neglected files. Emergency placements were accelerated. Additional funding reached programs that had been starved of resources. Most importantly, children who had spent months trapped in administrative limbo finally received attention. For Noah, however, the greatest change was much simpler. He no longer woke up wondering where he would sleep. The months that followed brought a kind of healing he had once considered impossible. He returned to school full-time and slowly rebuilt the education he had lost. Teachers quickly discovered that beneath his quiet personality was a sharp mind and remarkable determination. The boy who had once spent nights hiding in abandoned sheds began earning excellent grades. Max remained his constant companion, often waiting beside the front door every afternoon for Noah to return home. The legal process regarding Noah's future took time, but eventually the courts reached a decision. After extensive review, and with support from social workers, educators, and community members, Ryan Carter became Noah's legal guardian. The day the paperwork was finalized, Noah sat silently in the truck for several minutes after leaving the courthouse. Ryan finally glanced toward him. "You okay?" The boy nodded, but tears filled his eyes. "I just didn't think anybody would pick me." Ryan looked forward through the windshield. Then, he answered quietly, "That's because you still think this was about somebody choosing you." Noah frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan smiled. "Kid, you chose us first." Years passed. The seasons turned across Montana as they always had. Snowstorms came and went. Pines continued swaying beneath winter winds. Noah grew taller. His shoulders broadened. The frightened child Ryan had met beside the bus station slowly transformed into a confident young man. He never forgot what had happened. Perhaps that was why he eventually chose to study law. By the time Noah graduated from university, he had developed a reputation for advocating on behalf of children trapped inside complicated systems. Professors admired his dedication. Judges respected his preparation. Clients trusted him because he understood something many professionals never could. He knew what it felt like to become invisible. Ryan watched every milestone with quiet pride. The years touched him too. Gray gradually appeared at his temples. The lines around his eyes deepened. Yet he never regretted the decision he made beside that bus station on a snowy evening long ago. Time affected Max most visibly. The powerful German shepherd eventually slowed. White fur appeared around his muzzle. His steps became more careful. Long hikes through the forest turned into shorter walks, yet his loyalty never changed. Even as age weakened his body, he remained happiest when surrounded by the people he loved. When Noah turned 43, he announced a project that had occupied years of planning, a residential center for homeless and vulnerable children, not a shelter, a home. A place where children could find safety, education, counseling, and dignity. Construction took nearly 2 years. The grand opening occurred on a bright spring afternoon. Community leaders attended, former foster children attended, families attended, reporters attended. Many expected the center to carry Ryan Carter's name. Others assumed it would honor Noah. Instead, a large sign stood proudly above the entrance, Max House. Laughter and tears spread through the crowd simultaneously. Near the entrance stood a bronze statue. It did not depict a soldier. It did not depict a lawyer. It did not depict a politician. The statue showed a young boy kneeling beside a German shepherd, offering half of a sandwich. By then, Max had already passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family he had helped create. During the dedication ceremony, Noah stood before the crowd and looked toward Ryan, who sat quietly in the front row. Then he spoke. "People think my life changed because someone saved me. That's not exactly true. My life changed because one hungry boy made a choice, and one good man decided that choice mattered." Everything that happened afterward started with kindness. The audience remained silent. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Noah looked up at the bronze statue. then toward the children already playing inside the new center, and finally, toward the sky. I gave away half a sandwich because my mother taught me that kindness matters most when it's difficult. What I didn't know then was that God was already preparing a family for me on the other side of that decision. The applause lasted several minutes, yet the most important sound came afterward. Children laughing, safe, fed, protected, and walking through a door that would never close behind them. 2. Sometimes we think miracles arrive with great signs, loud voices, or extraordinary events. But more often, God works through ordinary people, making extraordinary choices. Noah did not have money, power, or influence. All he had was half a sandwich. Yet when he chose kindness over fear, that single decision set into motion a chain of events that changed countless lives. In our daily lives, we may never know how much impact one small act of compassion can have. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of patience, or a simple gesture of love may be exactly what someone needs to keep going. God often uses ordinary people to answer prayers that others have been whispering in silence. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters. Leave a comment below and tell us what lesson stayed with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of hope, faith, and second chances. And before you leave, take a moment to pray with us. May God bless you, protect your family, strengthen your faith, and bring peace to your home. May He guide your steps, open doors when you feel lost, and remind you that you are never alone, even in your hardest seasons. God bless you, and thank you for being part of this journey.